Hello, my name is Wonder, as I'm sure many of you know by now. Whether you've known me in the past for my content or a friend or neither, you're probably here to watch and hear the other side of a story involving me and my former colleagues that came out this week. I won't try to show face or sugarcoat anything in this video, as that would honestly be a disservice to myself. As you can already tell, my eyes are very much drifting off the screen. That is because I have put together a script so I can kind of keep my thoughts in line. It's not to say I don't feel genuine about any of this, it's just I need these kind of things to keep my brain from being erratic and going anywhere. So if it looks kind of odd and like I'm looking away, that's the reason why. This type of stuff makes me highly uncomfortable, but it is something that needs to be said. A couple days ago, a creator, a former friend, and an employer named by Blair, aka Iilluminaughtii, made a video discussing a few controversial topics she'd been the spotlight of. After discussing her first two controversies in her video, she moved on towards another topic, a group channel by the name of Sad Milk, accusations against a former member, and lastly, me. And as you may have noticed, I take up a fairly lengthy portion of her video. Now, I would like to say that the beginning of the Sad Milk discussion does begin with a former member known by The Click who came forward to express his experiences with Blair and how he did not want to associate with her. Upon seeing a former member come forward, I felt the strong emotional urge to speak out on my experiences with Blair. I had kept quiet for 2 years out of fear and NDA threats, but seeing Click come forward and kind of stick his foot in that pool and that fear allowed me the emotional strength I needed to come forward with a story of my own. I'll have my thread up on the screen here, but as you can tell, I was initially pretty emotional. You can also find a follow-up twit longer after she had made her video in the description, as well as a Google Drive where I'll be providing my evidence as presented in the video. It brought a lot of pain front and center. One thing you might notice in my thread, and that Blair rightfully points out, is that a large portion of my thread is in fact anecdotal, aside from the one image I shared of her living conditions. A photo in which she claims I took myself in a room that was strictly off limits due to it being for unpacking. A room in which I actually never set foot in once, and an image that was sent to me showing the living conditions of the house that she was subjecting my friend to. There will be more on that later in the video. So yes, I did not provide receipts to back my claim. This is not by accident or an attempt to tell lies about my story. My first reason was so Blair couldn't pick apart my records and falsify the truth. The second reason is due to some of the information regarding the car and my employment and its repossession. Some of that information is part of a pending legal matter, and I did not want it to become front and center online. But since Blair has made this information known, I will be providing receipts for that topic as well. So while initially I was anecdotal, today I'm going to show you every receipt I have that not only combats, disproves, or proves my claims, but also debunks her narrative that my friend, Oz Media, has been supporting her throughout this. I'd like to note that in Blair's video, she does not show or touch base on the majority of Oz Media's Twitter thread, unlike The Click, OneTopic, and I. I'd like to keep these screenshots up for a moment for you to read at your own discretion. There will also be a link to it down below. I believe when you want people to know the truth and form opinions of either side, you should come forward with both stories. It's why I don't harbor any hatred or resentment towards anyone who holds a negative opinion of me after watching a video. I've been there. I've done that. We all have probably done that once or twice on the internet. It's literally the internet. And even after this, if you don't like me or agree with me, I have a personal bias, obviously, because it involves me, but I'll respect your opinion nonetheless. But before I say anything, I'd like to state a few things. Something else that I believe is very important. Whether you hate someone or not, to bring up someone's personal mental health as an arguing point is quite frankly a low blow. And it's not your story to tell. If anyone's going to explain my mental health, it is personally going to be me. You can argue I was doing the same when I revealed the state of her home, but I'd like to note that Blair has a dog named Casper that suffers from a disease known as pica. Blair has mentioned on numerous times that she takes care of a special needs dog. I'll have the definition here on the screen, but essentially it's a disorder where a dog grows anxious at times and eats random objects. This is not a safe environment for a dog to live in. Before I speak further, I'd like to provide a trigger warning involving the topics of pedophilia and harm towards children. If you're not comfortable, you may click off or head to the timestamp provided on screen. I will not be going in depth on the allegations against Click. Click has made a very thorough video which you can find in the description below if you'd like to watch, where he disproves these rather disgusting claims made towards him. But a personal question I would like to ask. If Blair had the information and documented evidence on a Discord server that, as she depicted, cultivated files. And truly believe this, why did she wait 3 years to come forward? Why did she allow the click on Sadmilk or play games with him in the free time? Why did she put a link for help for anyone affected by such actions of child grooming, yet didn't use her platform to speak up on a server and creator that is active to this day? If she were to argue a fear of retaliation, what is the reason? She makes content bringing light to the horrors of companies pretty much every week. Arguably, if she knew this was ongoing, knew the extent, and then said nothing, she would have arguably by proxy been responsible for any further victims in such a server. One more subject I'd like to touch base on is the call that took place between Blair, OT, and the Click, and a Reddit post that I made following their departure. I was indeed present for this call. This was a meeting designed to iron out the differences in tension in Sadmilk, as not only did our audience deserve it, but we as friends deserve it to ensure our friendship lasted. During this call, Blair began to become highly irritable and raised tensions where they did not need to be raised. I'd like to clarify that OT did not speak over her out of disrespect, but out of a minor Discord delay, to which she said, and I quote, "Shut the f up and let me talk for once." I remember it clearly. It was very nasty, and it was the first fatal blow to Sadmilk and the events that transpired and led up to today. OT, rightfully, left the call without a word at this point. Blick, however, tried to remain in the call and mitigate his intentions were for the betterment of the group, but Blair kept berating him. I have never heard Click, a very extroverted and talkative man, remain so quiet. I know I'm trying to read this off a script, but if I only had one way to describe this call, it was a very dark call. OT departed in the following days. After this, Click departed from Sadmilk as well. Audience members grew confused about this, so she took to Reddit to falsify a narrative which you can read on screen. I joined in as well on this. I explained how those who departed did not help us in numerous ways and that it all fell onto us. I'd like to point out that I directly lied on this post. Click, OneTopic, and the others did in fact assist in Sadmilk greatly, but they were growing increasingly frustrated and burnt out as what had started as a fun project of friends had turned into a content farm. We were trying to cram recordings in, take time out of our lives, and make content we didn't enjoy at this point. But where this reached its climax of enough is enough was when members would take time out of their day to show up to recordings upon their own busy channels and lives, only to find video and audio recordings of entire Sadmilk episodes had been deleted due to quote-unquote not being good enough. I believe this context is needed and sheds much needed light on a post I made out of malice towards my former colleagues. I believed Blair had my best interest at heart and was being thorough with me. I have since been proven that this was far from the case. It's time we set the record straight on the matter. As stated before, my name is Wonder, and this is my response to Blair's Iilluminaughtii exposed. Thank you for being here, and I appreciate you taking the time to hear both sides of the story. In Blair's video, she mentions how she bore the brunt of a lot of the behind-the-scenes works to Sadmilk due to nobody stepping up to the plate to support her. One specific issue she brought to the table in particular was late payments on behalf of the contracted talent of Sadmilk. As I have seen other milkmen and their bank statements, I'd like to focus on her allegations directed towards me in regards to delayed payments. Here is the precise quote referenced.
And I also got stuck footing the bill too. What quickly transpired was that members either couldn't or wouldn't reimburse me for the editors.
I'd like to state that this quote is both chronologically and directly false, and it paints me as a rather greedy and avoidant person, which is not who I am. As I stated in my Twitlogger, which once more you can find in the description, in my span of Sadmilk, I edited roughly 3 to 5 Sadmilk videos. Sadmilk was a channel that lasted almost over a year. I was not an active editor, so to say I paid editors via my own edits is inaccurate. I did not become an editor to cover my share of the joint editing fees. During the time in which Sadmilk became a project, I was living paycheck to paycheck in my first apartment. I was barely 19 and food was pretty much an every other day kind of deal. I'm sure anyone who has had an apartment or been young or on their feet working 2 jobs, you know this life, you know this story, it's been said and done a million times. And yet I always paid my share. I put Sadmilk above my own health because I truly believed in the project. How I came to even edit a single Sadmilk video was when I was in a Discord call with the Sadmilk members, and while we were all chatting, having a good time, I, in my free time, edited a small little demo using all of our sprites.
Everyone, welcome to Sadmilk.
Download today. Oh, sorry.
No!
Welcome to Sadmilk. I was then offered, hey, if you want to edit a video, we'd be happy to pay you. I was such a new creator and I was so new to contract work itself that I personally thought $20 was fair pay for my work after my initial payment that I asked for was Burger King because I just wanted dinner. Obviously, I was compensated more than that for that video. After about 3 months in, Sadmilk became profitable though. So while yes, Blair did pay for edits, she was always reimbursed for this. As you can see stated on the screen, you will find bank statements I made directly to Sad Milk during its infancy. Blair's response to this and her closing thoughts on Sad Milk are quoted as the following.
To all of the members of Sad Milk, I just want to say that I'm very sorry that I caused you stress throughout this project.
I'd ask that you remember this quote as I believe, through my own biased lens, that this apology contradicts itself several times throughout this video. But with that, we wrap up the mention of Sad Milk and we now move on to the mention of me, Wonder.
A very convenient series of videos resurfaced with him saying some not so savory things after he left Sad Milk. I was actually unaware of those videos at the time of our friendship, but had I been aware of them, that friendship would have likely ended sooner. When those videos surfaced, it wasn't really all that shocking to me, as Oz Media and I had actually talked about how Click had been using the R slur while we played games together.
Now, I feel the best way to do this would be to start with some quotes, and I'll shed light on my thoughts on said quotes.
A lot of it is fairly tricky since he hinges his accusations on anecdotal commentary. In responding to his baseless claims, I will provide evidence as necessary, as well as point out when things I mention are anecdotal.
After hearing this part of the video, I'd like to note a few things. Yes, my original tweet thread was very anecdotal aside from the photo of the living conditions, which as I mentioned, we will touch base on later in the video. And as I stated before, I felt holding the cards in my hand, as well as not speaking on something that could very well encroach into legal matter territory, was in my best interest. I had been Blair's friend for years. I expected her to try to do something where she would try to twist the narratives. At least, in my experience, that is what I have seen in the past. So while yes, I was very word of mouth, however, it was not my intention to remain word of mouth. That is untrustworthy, and never in a million years would that back up any of the claims that I am here to bring forward. Moving on to the next section I'd like to touch base on, we're going to go over her discussion of my employment. Now, I'd like to note that the discussion of employment will come back around as she gets into another section surrounding legalities, which ties in towards the end of my employment.
Let's start with Wonder's accusation of wage theft. That's a big one, and it's important. During December 2020, like all of the members of Sad Milk, Wonder was considered a contractor. On December 24th, 2020, at 5:39 a.m., I received a message from Wonder letting me know that he took a shot at reworking a video that had already been edited by a different contractor. I want to clarify, I did not ask him to do this. This was something he did of his own accord. I don't want to claim to know what goes on in Wonder's personal life. Claiming that he missed Christmas with his brother and father, I just don't know how that's possible when the video was finalized early morning on Christmas Eve.
You claim you don't know what goes on in my personal life, but you go in depth about my living situation, my views on life, my depression, my car, my dog, and my mental health. I don't mean this in an antagonizing manner. Let's just call a spade a spade. As for missing Christmas, you raise a very good point, and without context, I can understand where your confusion would arise, so hopefully I can clear this up for you. I'd like to paint a picture here if you'd allow me to do so. December is one of the most important months as a creator. For those of you who don't know, there are better or worse months to post to YouTube due to when advertisers are most willing to pay, and most advertisers are wanting to put their highest performing ads on videos during the holiday months such as Christmas. This equals a higher CPM, which for those of you who are in the creator space, it will all just kind of water down to this. Higher paying ads plus more videos equals more push equals more money in your pocket. It's a lot of boring stuff. Puts food on the table, pays your bills. That's all you need to know. At this time, I was a full creator. I didn't make crazy amounts of money, but I made enough to live on my own terms. During December, I was churning out content from my own channel. I needed it as a small growing channel and as someone who needed to pay his bills. However, our editors were short in the month of December, so what Blair fails to mention in her video, I will clarify. December 21st, I had just completed a Sad Milk video that took me 16 hours give or take to make. I had pulled an all-nighter to do so, as we had discussed trying to have a stronger pull for the holiday months. A few days prior, I had just pulled yet another all-nighter to get a video out for the 19th on my own personal channel. We had an editor who had been tasked to complete a Sad Milk vlog that was intended to go up December 24th. Blair had hired this editor. She never once, as far as my knowledge, checked in on this editor to see his progress with said video. Where I grew worried is that as far as I knew, I had never seen this editor do any work for Sad Milk, and we were really coming up on the deadline of the 24th. On December 23rd, after starting another project and working through the entire day, putting a dent into my own personal edit, I got into bed only to find that Oz had received the video from the editor. I took a look at the video, asked an unbiased source their opinion, and we all agreed that the video had major issues for a supposed finished product. These issues included scuffed audio, poor audio leveling, unnecessary edits that made relatively no relation to the edit itself, followed by long periods of dead air for an increased watch time push. I do not mean this as an insult. It resembled a home movie gone bad rather than a fleshed out project for a channel that had almost 200,000 subscribers. I knew this was a severe problem for two reasons. First, the deadline for the upload was the following morning. Second, this video was expensive and intended since November to be a Christmas Eve video. The video in reference was a Sad Milk gingerbread house building competition where we all flew out to Colorado. Blair purchased a large amount of items for said video, such as microphones, gingerbread houses, and Santa hats, all that material you need to make a gingerbread house. I'd like to add that Blair intended to use these expenses as a tax write-off, so it wasn't a total loss. We were all contracted for an entertainment company. In order for this to be a tax write-off, we would need to produce a video to prove as such. So now we have to think of the perception of Sad Milk, a project that represented all of our names. This puts us in a position with very limited options. We either let down the audience and post a very scuffed video that would exhibit a lack of care for the content we were making, which was not ideal given we had just lost half our members. We delay the video, which ties in with the first issue as our Christmas Eve video, which would either get out the 26th or the 27th at the earliest due to our available editors. Or we scrap the video, which leaves Blair out of money regardless, but now we have also wasted an entire trip visiting another state, and there are a bunch of expenses that can't qualify as a tax write-off. So I got out of bed after working all day, and I took my best shot at reworking a video in a style I was not familiar with. I was up roughly until 5 a.m. working on that video, and I waited to make sure it was good to upload and that we had the okay. I did this to avoid those negative outcomes I just listed. My sleep schedule was beyond screwed, so by the time I went to bed later that night, I slept due to pure exhaustion until well into the early afternoon of Christmas Day. To add to this, my family does not see each other very often, so for us to be in one room is a very rare thing. I had not seen my brother in almost a year, and I know Christmas is important to my father. Since we can't all spend an entire day together as we all have our own various lives, we plan to spend the morning of Christmas together. Obviously, it did not pan out that way. I'd like to add that no, Blair did not directly ask me to make this rework. However, Blair had made it clear in the last few months, especially when Click and OT left, that she felt she had no help with the channel, that she felt the responsibility fell onto her. This was me helping her. Not just her, but a project I dearly cared about. I'd like to now focus on my pay. I said I was not paid until half a month after. This, I will admit, was anecdotal mostly. Blair said I was paid on a bi-weekly Sad Milk basis. At this time, Sad Milk was making money, just not a whole lot of it after editorial expenses. So typically I could see a check for $80 to $140 every month. As for editing, I had negotiated $500 per edit as Oz helped me realize my worth as an editor, and as for compensation for me not being a full-time editor. I'd like to add that in part of what I agreed for edits, I would do additional sprite movement, motion, and scene creation. This was painstaking to do, but this was also a quality result I would bring to the table of this channel while also working on my own channel. The editor we hired to the vlog, to my knowledge, was to be paid $200 for their edit. However, since I reworked the video last minute, I was to be compensated with $100, which I believe was fair pay. So I'd like for us to view the following bank statements, two in particular, one on January 29th, 2021 for $125, and another on February 29th, 2021 for $600. Now, I tried to dig deeper, but this just says a transaction from a bank occurred. I'd like to state that at first, I believed I was receiving Sad Milk payments via PayPal, so I tried to find an old email. Since I was making a fair amount of money, I would usually just let money stack into my PayPal and I would take it all out at once. And you can see right here that this is what a statement like that would look like in my bank account. At this time, I worked full-time, so my only income was from Google AdSense, Twitch, and Sad Milk. While it has been a long time, if I remember correctly, these payments would numerically and chronologically line up with Sad Milk and editor payments. It is the only possible source of this income that makes sense, which then shows me for the month of January, I actually only received one Sad Milk payment if that's the case. And it also distinctly shows that I was in fact paid separately as both Sad Milk talent and an editorial talent. I'd like to note that these payments are over the course of 1 to 2 months, not a month and a half. At the beginning of January, you can see I was paid $100 from this income source. That would make sense given half of the $200 video would, yes, be $100. However, if you look at the month of December, I did not receive one payment from Sad Milk. So I would assume unless Sad Milk just did very poorly that month and we made absolutely zero income, as I did not manage these channels' finances, this payment would be the Sad Milk payment for December. And if it was for fixing the video, why was I clearly paid the $600 here followed by the prior regular Sad Milk bank statement, 500 being for the original video I did, and 100 being for the video I corrected. I had someone else take a look at the calendar, and if these payments were bi-weekly and I had a pay period beginning on the 1st, my pay period should have seen payments starting from the 1st, followed by the 15th, the 29th, which is correct, but we were missing a pay period, the 12th, then the 26th, but I was paid on the 19th. You can argue that Sad Milk was performing bad financially, which resulted in delayed or no payments by this time, as we had not uploaded since December and views did in fact dwindle. But that begs the question, if the payment of $600 is an editor payment, which I'd argue is because Sad Milk itself and its contractors never saw an amount that large in its history, why am I being paid for it not half a month late, but almost 2 months late? My only other theory is that these payments were in a source such as PayPal, where I could allow the funds to store up then deposit. However, it would still be delayed and show I was paid separately as an editor and contracted talent for Sad Milk.
During this time, he would often tell both Oz Media and myself how living in Austin, Texas was a nightmare for him. He would often complain about his roommates being terrible people, his friends being mostly terrible people and unmotivated to do well in life, and how his car was always breaking down and how his channel was not going in the direction he wanted. And then he talked about that last bit of family that he had moving away, and he was essentially alone. I won't speak on behalf of Oz, but I know I was moved by Wonder's stories.
So I'd like to clarify here. Yes, I didn't like living where I lived. I live, as Blair stated, in Austin, Texas, and I don't mean to be humorous here given the severity of this video, but it's like, man, the people who live here hate living here. It's just like a thing. Like, I'm gonna maybe go get some groceries today. You gotta wait like 5 hours in line behind rows and rows of traffic. You want to go to the park, you gotta drop like $15 just to touch grass because you gotta pay for parking. It's like a meme here that if you see a cardboard box, like any person who's from here will point it and be like, oh yeah, that looks like it would go for $2,300. There's many great things about this place, but it's for a very niche particular crowd of people, which I do not fall in line with that. As for my roommates, I only had one roommate, and he's one of my best friends who I would do literally anything for. Have I gotten annoyed with him? Yes. Who hasn't been annoyed with any friend in their life? I'm sure I've done plenty of things to piss him off. Is he a terrible person? Never in a million years, so I don't know why this is even really being brought up. I think the times where I got most annoyed was where there were 2 incidences where I accidentally got locked out of the house and he sleeps like you could probably fire a ballistic missile next to this man and he would sleep through it. So I ended up having to sleep in my car twice, and there was dishes out and stuff we've all made the same mistake of in the past, okay? He's not a terrible person, and neither are my friends. And no, I wouldn't say that my friends are unmotivated in life. I would say that during this time, I was really wanting to move forward with content and really get into creating full time, which I was already doing, but I wanted to take it a step further. I wanted this to be my life. And my friends, obviously, because everyone has different goals and dreams, do not share this sentiment. It wasn't that they were unmotivated, it's that I just was losing that connection of, hey, y'all don't really get what I'm doing, I don't really get what you're doing, and it sucks, but that's just how friends are, you know? You're not gonna relate forever with every single thing you and your friends do. As for my car was not breaking down constantly. I had a 2011 sedan. The only thing I didn't like about it was that somebody rear-ended the back and it looked like it was dented in. It looked like someone took a massive fist to the back of the car. I have never had one maintenance issue on that car. In fact, my brother still owns the car to this day. My channel was actually going in a really good direction. At this time, I was starting to pull a lot of steady views, but the narrative behind the closed doors and Sad Milk was that we should all be moving away towards Reddit content and getting into video essay type content like Blair. It was a very known thing behind closed doors where we would insult and belittle anyone who still did Reddit, while Oz and I actually were still doing Reddit. So it developed into a resentment towards my own content, which my audience liked, but I now was finding that I despised what I did.
Without going into personal details, I was pretty horrified by what he had explained happened in his past. I was saddened by how he constantly talked about how bad his life was and how he felt like a failure. He said he felt alone, depressed, and uncertain of the future. And at that point, I knew I wanted to help him in whatever way I could.
I feel this is very contradictory to say without going into personal details, than to turn around and spread personal details about my views towards life. Again, these were very private things I kept between you. Yes, I I suffer from depression. A lot of people do, and oftentimes that can skew your view towards life itself. The only time I ever really felt like a failure was when I constantly was compared via Social Blade, etc., and told how much better I could be doing if I did XYZ. It made me feel like I was underachieving as a small channel.
At the end of 2020, I paid for his tickets to visit Oz and me in Colorado. During this trip, we discussed the possibility of Wonder moving out to Colorado due to his discontent with his life in Texas. Oz Media and I had just moved into his newly purchased home in April 2021, and he decided to welcome Wonder into his house. Unless Oz Media was doing so without my understanding, Wonder was not charged any rent, utilities, or internet for sharing our living space.
Yes, we had actually discussed a payment plan for rent. What Blair leaves out, and what I find very perplexing as to why she left out in her video, is that the reason I didn't pay rent was because I was going to become Blair's tenant. Not once does she mention throughout this video that when I first had the discussion of moving to Colorado, it was because Blair wanted to get her hands into the real estate market and wanted to build a home, something she had discussed with other former Sad Milk members. It wasn't just me. I made a reasonable first tenant. I was someone she knew, and I obviously made income, so kind of put two and two together. You can say this is a good deed on the surface, and it most certainly appears that way. I'll get into how over time Blair would have controlled every aspect of my life, via transportation, income, and housing. I sincerely do not understand why the conception of this home was never presented in the video. It leaves out a massive gap of context. The home I was told would be finished by August, and then I could stay the summer. And the last month before moving to Colorado, after finalizing my lease, I was informed that the home would be pushed back until December. This made me highly uncomfortable, which you can see the dates in these private DMs between Oz and a friend of mine who will remain anonymous. I have always been a very independent person. I have never had someone else pay my rent once in my life, and I have been living on my own since I was 18. To try to paint me as a freeloader when you also leave out that I was originally only supposed to stay until August, you were supposed to be my landlord, and that I only stayed 30 days in Colorado feels like a contorted attack on who I am as a person. While I was in their home, if I didn't know how to help, I would oftentimes clean their home. I wanted to help Blair with her recording space as she felt stressed in her little office. I wanted to buy us plants to liven the place up. I tried at every possible turn to earn my keep. And when I felt alienated, I tried to actively find an apartment in Colorado Springs to give them both the space, as I felt horrible, seemingly never being able to help in any way at all. It was beyond unfair. I made every effort to not be a burden, as it is quite frankly one of my biggest fears in my entire life.
I'm Oz. Y'all know me as Oz Media.
Now, during the month of June, I stayed with you, Oz, and Blair. During this time, did Blair provide work to me as an editor? If this wasn't a case, did you ever witness me personally trying to assist Blair in anything else?
Yeah, I mean, you weren't provided work for like a majority of the time that you were actually employed. I think we were also working on Thinkology at the time, but nothing really came out of that besides a couple recordings, and you ended up not really wanting to pursue that. So there wasn't any work that she had actually given you part of the company. You were kind of just literally being paid to stand around. I might be wrong on this, but you actively did try to assist her with her the candle shop that she was just starting up, and I mean, she didn't like that, but you were actively trying to seek out and find work, so it's not like you were just freeloading off of it. From my memory, you were trying to actually earn your keep.
Blair proceeds to go on an explanation as to how well her channel was doing and that she felt grateful to be in a position to help someone she cared deeply about. On June 7th, 2021, I was hired by Blair starting at $50,000 a year, as she stated, which was a number that seemed rather life-changing to me. At face value, I'm sure anyone who saw this viewed me as someone who had to cut a few clips together and everything was happily ever after. That is what I personally expected. However, I will explain that this was not the case regarding my employment, as I was soon to find out.
During his employment, he never took advantage of any of the benefits that were made available to him.
The reason I did not use any of these benefits was because I was employed for roughly 60 days. I had just moved to another state. I barely even knew the roads and where to even go to eat. I wasn't focused on doctor visits, the dentist, and unless I turn 85 years old, I can't really use my 401k. The only thing that that I can think of was the groceries that the LSA covers, but as I stated before, I'm a rather independent person, so I didn't need Blair to particularly buy me groceries. I also find it unnecessary that she goes out of her way to explain the volunteer reimbursement program she has. If I didn't use any of the benefits, why is it necessary to go into detail about them? Was I expected to, in the middle of moving to a new state for the first time since I was 7, volunteer at a soup kitchen to pass the time?
The content for Wonder to edit was dependent on me being able to live stream. During this time, I unfortunately only had 2 streams for him to work on, which Wonder would have been able to produce about 4 videos from. Wonder did not meet the deadlines for either stream. Despite this, I kept him on payroll, I continued his pay, even though no work had ever been completed. Although there was only a minuscule amount of work for Wonder to do, he still managed to act up within company spaces. He made inappropriate comments on forms that were visible to other employees, he didn't complete tasks that were assigned to him, and he failed to follow company protocol. I have a strict policy regarding formal disciplines, and within his short time of working with me, he had already met the criteria for termination.
After hearing this, I'd assume you'd attribute me as someone with a very poor work ethic, and I honestly would not blame you. However, while Blair is being very anecdotal here, I'd like to provide receipts that prove the following. Proof that I was not kept on payroll and I was fired before my deadline even happened. These were not short clips. The comment that I made on a forum that was grounds for termination, Blair leaving out how long it took her to actually provide content to edit, Blair leaving out that I had asked for work and various other aspects, my deadline extension due to my computer editing software corrupting, not me being lazy, me flying to another state to meet said deadlines with plane tickets provided, and again, proof that I was fired before my deadline even happened. Before we begin, I'd like to state that I was informally fired on a phone call July 27th, that I received my final severance letter July 30th. But as you can see here in private DMs with an editorial manager, my deadline was extended to August 2nd. I was fired within my deadline. To add context, Blair had not streamed for the entire month of June, and come the further end of mid-July, she had finally streamed. I was given one stream that would result in 2 videos having 20-minute plus durations on both videos. So for context, these were not short clips, rather 20 to 40-minute chunks of content, which is exactly what I signed up for. This in itself was not a problem. However, upon getting far into making the video, my editing software corrupted.
Said in a statement that it was pleased with the ruling, which would allow it to continue to use treatment. So that's from this article.
I was staying with my dad in Texas, which we'll touch base on why in a little bit here, and only had my laptop, which had never had an issue before. I had had this laptop for roughly, I want to say a year at this point. Never once had I run into a software corrupting issue. So I reached out to an editorial manager explaining the situation. They asked that I take PTO, but instead I held off because Oz Media said he could get my PC fixed. I was running out of time, but my deadline initially was July 26th. So last second, I flew to Colorado to get my computer just so I could turn around and fly back. It was at this time I had noticed I was locked out of the editor files, which I found odd given that I was still within my deadline, but I didn't exactly know what was happening. I just had figured it was an error at the time. I'd like to make note that the other editorial manager explained to me that my deadline at this time had actually been extended to August 2nd. The editorial manager reached out to me on the 26th saying we needed to talk. For one reason or another, this conversation got pushed to July 27th. I believe this was just due to a simple scheduling conflict. I believe by the time I was able to take a call, that like when I had seen the message, they were busy for the rest of the day. So it just got pushed over to July 27th. It wasn't like I was like ducking the calls like, oh my goodness. It was here on this call that I was fired for explicitly not meeting deadlines, which I find highly confusing due to once more I must reiterate that my deadline was August 2nd. Not to be redundant, but I'd like to remind you that I flew to another state just to meet this deadline for my boss, who was constantly subtweeting about me. You can see is acknowledged even by one of her own managers, and they told me specifically that this was not okay behavior. A few days later, after being fired on July 27th, on July 29th, Blair came to Texas to revoke a car in the middle of the night, which she claimed I breached contract, which we will get to in a moment as to how this was not the case. But first, I want to just take a moment that I hope this sheds light into just how far I was willing to go to ensure that these video deadlines were met. That I was willing to fly exhausted and tired and not on great terms with my boss to fly to another state just so I could meet a deadline. I sincerely cared about my job, and I feel it is just extremely wrong to paint me in a light as some lazy individual who just didn't care at all. It was extremely hurtful after showing the links I will go to just show that I am a good employee. I wish my computer still worked and that I hadn't deleted these files, because it just seems worse, because it makes it sound like I am being very anecdotal when it's not the case. My laptop literally just does not turn on anymore, and I didn't think I was ever going to need these videos in particular to prove a point online on the internet about my work ethic. As for the finalized video that I completed on the desktop after my laptop did not work, I don't have that either, because I have reset and rebuilt my computer I don't know how many times, and you can see photos of me right here and tweets about me talking about how many times I have taken a swing at trying to fix this computer. As for the inappropriate comment I made on a forum, I have never heard of this. Blair claims to have a strict policy on discipline, yet why didn't she or her staff ever reach out to me about this problem? Why does she not provide evidence on this comment, and what forum? So I reached out to Oz and I found the answer, and the comment I made was supposed to be grounds for termination. I'd like to reiterate that means a total loss of income to a person. This was along the lines of the comment that I made. If I could be an animal for a day, I would be a furry, and my favorite food would be ass. You can't make this up, man. Total loss of income because I said as a joke, I said I was a furry. I don't know. In regards to my pay on the surface, 50k a year sounds beyond generous for editing a channel. I'd agree. I was personally astounded. I moved my entire life to another state because of this number. I figured I could really make something of myself with this type of income. However, I'd like to go back where she mentions the benefits. Blair lists an array of many wonderful benefits that I could receive as an employee. I'd like you now to look at what I earned during each pay period here. Now, I'd like to reiterate, this is at face value. I'm more than willing to stand corrected if I'm wrong here with numbers. You can see here on my screen that the amount of money I made during each pay period was $1,434.24. I made this twice during my employment with Blair. If we do the math on that, we can divide this number by 2 to see how much I made on a weekly basis. $717.12. Say roughly there's 4.25 weeks in a month, $3,047.76 per month. Okay, well that leaves a big question. Where's the rest of the money? So I did some more math. Let's say that everything had gone according to plan and the house Blair built was done in August like it was intended to be. I believe the range for the rent was $1,500 at the time, so around $300-ish for utilities. Now throw in a car that I have to pay Blair for the next 2 years. $588 a month plus $125 for insurance. Now let's add in say $100 a month in gas due to it being a car that relies on premium gas. So after all this is said and done, my take home before food, clothes, leisure would look more like this every month. A grand total of roughly $434.76. However, given that the house wasn't built, this wasn't the case and I was making about $1,000 take home. Well, maybe that isn't so bad. I do in fact have a car, I have a house, and I have a job. However, the one scary thing when you put all that on a spectrum is they are all provided by one singular individual. Blair. She had a hand in every single aspect of my life, and at any moment she could take it away when she felt, which is exactly what happened. Where I could be wrong about the pay itself is where I received my final check at the end of the month for $1,570.60. I was told this was my bi-weekly final pay, which makes sense, but when I signed a severance letter, I also received $1,570. So this was either severance pay or this was the allocated amount I would have made via the LSA every month if that was how that operated. Even reading this aloud, I am still highly confused as to how this payment structure works, as it was never properly explained to me. But even if that were the case, it doesn't change that in order to keep a roof over my head, food on my table, and my dog's bowl and transportation, I had to be walking on eggshells 24/7 due to someone's unpredictable and erratic behavior. There is not, nor will there ever be, a price you can pay me to where I will put up with being a verbal punching bag. It will never happen as long as I live. So if I'm wrong, sure, I would have made some money, probably net over $1,000 a month, which again isn't bad. But if my numbers are right, I'd be sitting at $717.12, give or take. Times that by 52 weeks in a year, roughly $37,290.24 a year, as I've stated, give or take. So I tried to dig a little deeper into this LSA Blair mentioned. Once more, I'd like to add that I am not entirely versed in legal speak, so I read through the LSA Blair provided in her video, and here is what I could personally gather. Each month I was given a company allowance of $300. If I did not use this money, I would not be allocated these funds, which again, I'd like to note is stated to be entirely optional. If I purchased an item and submitted a receipt, I would be reimbursed this allowance, and if I bought something without the full allowance, I would be allocated, I believe, an additional $100. The smaller payments would appear on my paycheck within 30 days, but larger ones could take upwards of 3 months. But where I have a hard time understanding these numbers is if I use the monthly allowance of the $300, waited and received $300 on my paycheck, my total income would be $1,570.60 if the $1,434.23 was due to me being a new hire. But where I'm having a hard time understanding these numbers is if I use the monthly allowance of $300, waited and received the $300 on my paycheck, my total income would look a little different. We're gonna go off the number of $1,570.60 since the $1,434.23 I believe could be due to me being a new hire, but I am not entirely sure where this number comes from and why it varies between this paycheck right here. $1,570.60 plus $300, that comes out to $1,870.60. But in Blair's video, it is stated that I made somewhere near the high 1900s. Well, as it turns out, I was actually able to find a number in this ballpark. I was paid $1978.38. But if we zoom out, we can see that this was actually my gross pay, meaning again, from what I can understand, my take home in reality was $1,560 per paycheck. So from my understanding, this would mean in order to come close to obtaining my full paid amount, I would have to rely on the LSA, and at most, I would be reimbursed to a maximum of $1,870.60 if I use the maximum allowance every month, then waited in upwards of almost 3 months to see this reimbursement. The only reasoning I can seem to wrap my head around for this would be so the company could have on paper that I made a salary of $50,000 a year, when in actuality, this technically isn't the case. After doing these numbers and re-looking at them again, I'd like to make a correction to my already made correction. So for my LSA, I would be paid $300 per month, not per paycheck, so my number of $1,870.60 isn't accurate. Well, yes, I could get paid that amount. The next paycheck would only be $1,570.60 again, as a $300 reimbursement is limited to once per month. This would allocate to a total annual maximum of $3,600. I'd like to bring up once more that the reason I didn't complete tasks was not because of me, but because Blair never provided work until mid to late July. And when I worked, I went above and beyond to ensure it was completed. And again, I was fired within my deadline. I hope this adds some context that was missing from the video. But moving on to our next section, let's speak on legalities. They proceed as such. Blair touches on the subject of a BMW she purchased for me due to my old car dying and wanting to help a friend out. I'd like to clarify I did not ask Blair to do this. In fact, I insisted on our first call the exact opposite. I am not a luxurious person. I like nice things like cozy homes, but the most expensive car I have ever owned was a $5,000 Miata, and that was a surprise gift from my dad after my first car got stolen. I do not desire expensive things, as that just personally is not who I am. Also, as a person who does not like when people buy me things, I was extremely uncomfortable with someone making such a large payment towards a vehicle on my behalf. But in Blair's words, she had the money and insisted that I get the car. After a few more discussions, she eased me into the idea that this car was a good move and would really change my life. I never saw the paperwork on the car. I never did any of the work to obtain the car. The most I did was go into a call with Oz and Blair where I got to choose seat colors. I had no idea of the process or what I was really genuinely getting myself into, which I don't see how you could argue that I did. I was 21 at the time. I can't think of a single 21-year-old that I know that has gone out and filed paperwork for a $50,000 to $60,000 car. I did not know what I was doing. However, Blair would oftentimes tell me that she herself had enough money to retire at any given moment. Now, she was a very successful businesswoman, and from the surface, that did seem true. Blair even had a few BMWs of her own, as well as Oz at the time, so I trusted my friends who seemed to have it all, and I trusted the process, which, again, I found out was a very bad mistake. The car itself was delayed, I believe, by 2 weeks, so when it finally arrived, I was pretty happy. I felt like I was beginning life like my friends.
Oh cool, I actually have a new functioning phone, so I can actually do fun video stuff.
However, things in the house were growing fairly grim. I was in therapy at the time and trying to do what I could to help out and also stay out of the way. I felt my brain start to shut down. I could barely function as it was. I would just drive out in my free time to this little trail. I guess you could just call it like a private spot, not really because it's in the public, but it was a little nice cliffside, and I would just hang out there because I didn't have any work at home and I just was not wanted around. I explained my situation to my therapist. It was a pretty similar message I sent to my friend in private. I miss feeling independent, and living rent-free for 6 months, which I did not sign up for, is making me feel like a burden and sick. I really feel like I'm losing touch with myself, and I'm not sure who I am at the moment. I told my therapist at this point that I hadn't felt real in a while, which anyone who has suffered with dissociation and dissociative episodes can all but relate to. I also reiterated how everything was starting to feel rather pointless and I didn't know what I was... that's so lame. I don't like to get emotional, but I didn't know what I was doing wrong. After hearing this, she made it urgently clear that I needed to leave the house immediately. Which, again, sorry, I need to calm down. In hindsight, I didn't realize how bad it was getting at the time. Yes, it had just never been that bad. Oh, it's so lame. She said whatever I needed to do, I just needed to go. So with no work, my only options were being in a home with someone who won't even speak to me, as I believe Oz had gone to visit his father at the time, or I could go visit my father and just spend some time with him. So I chose option 2. I explained the situation to my dad, and I ended up leaving to go see my father so I could spend the 4th of July with him and stay a while so I could mentally reset. I also did digital work, and this was not in violation of my employment, as I could work wherever I wanted via laptop. But before going, Blair had me sign her BMW contract she had been meaning to get to me for a while. She was fully aware of my intent to visit my father and stay a while, especially given that, again, I worked remotely. You now know the events that led up to July 29th, where the car was repossessed. You know the story of the deadlines, how I wasn't kept on payroll, how I flew to Colorado to make sure said deadlines occurred, etc., etc. We don't need to fully recap there. As Blair mentioned, she said I was legally bound to this car via contract. However, after I was fired and Colorado was said and done, I had my father, who is an ex-police officer and the former contractor, as well as a lawyer friend of the family, look over and review this legally binding contract. They both agreed that this was in fact not a legally binding contract. I'd like to state that I am not a lawyer and I don't know how that fully works, but let's say for argument's sake the contract was legally binding. Blair claims I broke the contract by the following: no proof of insurance, cars to reside in El Paso County. Okay, well, here's my proof of insurance, and here's my official mailing address during this time. You can clearly see it states Colorado. Here again, you can also see that my mailing address has not changed after the repossession. This car was not residing in Texas, as I did not reside in Texas. I lived in Colorado. I'd now like to point to a conversation I had with Oz Media, because Blair and I were not on speaking terms at this time, which was something she herself suggested took place between us. July 28th, 2021, one day before the repossession, Oz and I had a phone call together where I stated I would not be moving back to Colorado. He agreed it was probably the best option for me, as he was still at this time sympathetic towards everything happening. Note again, the car did not reside in Texas, as I did not have a residence in Texas at this time. Upon hearing this, Blair informed Oz that she wanted me to pay something that is known as a depreciation value, which is essentially, it's like, okay, you can't pay for the car, so you're going to pay for the value that the car lost while it was in your possession. I agreed. I didn't want further bad blood. I just wanted this whole situation to be done, as it had caused me enough stress as is. Oz gave me a set of options as to what I could do with the car, and I picked option 2, where it was agreed I would bring the car back to Colorado, gather my belongings, and I'd pay the value via regular payments, etc. However, when I asked to see everything my name was tied to legally with the car, which any person would do, I was met with a copy of the car contract. So I asked again to see the paperwork of the car. This was to ensure I was obtaining obtaining an accurate account of the car's value so I could legally assure what I was paying for. I believe that any person in my position should have done this. It is the only right thing to do to make sure you legally know what you're paying. After this message, I never once got a response. Later in the early hours of July 29th, 2021, Blair flew down to obtain the BMW. Hours after I agreed to pay for the car's appreciation value under the condition that I was paying what was accurate and visible to me. I did not have the text itself, as currently the phone I had at the time suffered, I believe it was a corrupted UI. All I know is I had a Google Pixel, and after some time, I believe last year, I plugged in the phone, gave me a big old question mark when I charged it. So I looked it up and I was like, what does this mean? Essentially, it just meant, yeah, your phone's kind of buddy. So if anyone knows how to pull images from a UI corrupted phone, please reach out and contact me, as I will happily provide these texts if I'm able to do so. At roughly 3 a.m., Blair sent me a text stating that I had breached numerous contract violations and that she was in Texas to repossess the vehicle. It goes without saying I was asleep at this time, so obviously I did not see a message that was sent to me at 3 a.m. in the morning. Once I woke up and I saw the messages, I asked Blair for an explanation as to how I breached my contract, to which I was ignored. However, Blair stated she would make arrangements for me to obtain my items. This never took place. I took to Twitter, where I made a tweet regarding what had just happened, and I was immediately reminded by one of Blair's managers that I could not speak out on the matter, and I was threatened with NDA. If I had to explain the feeling, I felt helpless. Again, I just wanted to do the right thing and do it the way I was asked, and now I wake up and all my belongings are gone. I cannot explain how weak that makes a person feel. It feels like just a massive, a massive you for no reason. Blair puts in her drive that the car had bottles, a few wrappers, and some clothes. What she fails to show in her video is my skateboard, both my Sad Milk and WonderStruck Guy play buttons, my $800 GoPro set, and a whole list of other items I was prohibited from obtaining, which I found out recently from Oz. These items were subsequently thrown in the trash after some time. I'd like to touch on the condition of the car as well. It looks bad, and truthfully, if I saw that, I would turn my head as well. I would think this is a madman who owned this car. But I'd like you to remain open-minded that I was basically living in this car due to not being able to stay in the same house as Blair, as my therapist recommended specifically that I do not do that. I did not have a home to go to, and I was on my dad's couch most of the time. As for the cracked windshield, that was due to a semi-truck pulling out in front of me on the highway.
Oh, no, in the sort of gesture that we're trying to do.
Councilmember Kevin Wright.
There's a lot of people out there who have probably experienced it. Sometimes semi-trucks will get pebbles stuck in their flaps and they will fly and they will ding the windshield and it's a crack. It sucks, but it happens. There's no way I myself could have pulled off this effect on this car. In regards to the glove box, I really don't know what happened. I went to get something out of the glove box and it just popped off. It's a small piece of plastic, and the BMW dealership in my town was more than happy to fix these issues when I visited them, which is a record Blair herself has. When I got the car, I was told it was insured via the BMW dealership, so I would have to have my own insurance, and then BMW had their own separate insurance. So if something happened with a car, I could go to the dealership, show the issues, and they would happily fix the issues for no charge at all. Which again, Blair has a record of me visiting the dealership due to the car blowing a flat due to A, low profile tires, and B, a pothole I didn't see due to nighttime and rain. They told me I could bring the car back whenever I please, and I intended to fix these issues before going back to Colorado, as returning it in such a condition would make no sense. After authorities were sent to my house the following morning, I explained the situation and the officers relayed their official opinion that I should cut contact with Blair, to which I did. I sent her one last text stating I would be ceasing communication and that she could reach me and make arrangements for my belongings via my father's number. Not one attempt was ever made. Legal demand letters were sent and signed off for. You can see the draft of such a demand letter and what it looked like on official paper in my Google Drive. After months and months of trying and receiving no communication or update, we were told by someone who represented Blair to back off or they would go after us for harassment. I know this is scripted, but I really want to reiterate here that I felt small. I felt defeated. I had literally left my apartment for this. I lost my independence for this. My belongings, either tech related or just memorabilia, were were and are still gone to this day. I didn't want to upload because I knew every time I did, I knew Blair was probably checking my social blade laughing at me, as I had seen her do to every single former Sad Milk member for months. I had no way to prove to my friends why I had seemingly high hopes for the future, and in the course of a summer I had almost no money to my name due to Blair's butterfly effect. None of the friends I had made would talk to me, and like OT and Click, rumors began to spread about me too. Admittedly on a smaller scale, but they were still about me nonetheless. I was fired. Blair had taken the car as well as my belongings. My life had been set back to square one. Which leads me to my next and most painful section, my mental health, which was proudly put on display for the world to see for some reason. Before we begin, I'd like to not so much trauma dump to a bunch of viewers, but rather give you the full scale of where my mental health arises and such. I feel it is important to share this context not just for me, but truthfully because there are a lot of people out there who remain silent about these kinds of things, and I want them to know they aren't alone. I'd also like to make two more notes. First, there's going to be a trigger warning, one involving self-harm, suicide, and child sexual assault. Another warning, this is probably going to be the section of the video where I don't know how to be very professional in this manner. I feel it is best that I just show you how raw this actually is, because trying to paint it in any other light just doesn't show the extent of how painful this actually is. Now, when I first saw Blair speaking upon my mental health, admittedly, I shut down. I was rightfully broken and disgusted that so many people could see the insight into my mental health. Something very private and a lot of times met with shame. There were so many things I wanted to say when I saw that. So many nasty and vile words of venom I wanted to throw into the void due to this becoming public on Blair's own doing. But it's not Blair's story to tell as to how I got to this point. It's mine. So when I want to say 3 to 4 years old, I was assaulted by a family friend's son. This was someone who I trusted, someone who I looked up to as a kid. This occurred for months, and without going into explicit detail, my parents found out. I remember being a kid and just seeing the abhorrent look of terror and tears on my parents' face, not being able to understand why they were so upset. Over the next, I guess, year or so, court proceedings took place, and the teenager who had assaulted me went to juvenile detention. My parents never really explained well what happened to me, which I can't really blame them. I can't really imagine myself in their position trying to explain that to a 4-year-old. The family who we had once been very close with no longer spoke to us, which felt strange because I lived in the same neighborhood as these kids. So when my brother and I would pass them in, say, a grocery store or at the pool, it was always met with just like silence and stares. I didn't understand what truly had occurred or the extent of what had occurred. I just recall knowing that in my head, this was my fault somehow. And to clarify, I don't believe this was anyone's fault that I felt this way. My parents were just doing the best they could, and the rest of us were just kids. There was literally no way for any kid around me to know what I was going through unless they themselves had gone through the same thing. Even I myself at the time didn't know what was happening. Why am I telling you this seemingly dark and unrelated set of information? Because I feel it's important to the story in its whole as to show the context of where this began. My mom suffers from chronic OCD. The brain can develop OCD due to an early childhood trauma. This is known as post-traumatic OCD, but at the same time, I was also predisposed due to my mother. OCD has many forms, and it's sometimes hard to understand if you aren't suffering from it yourself, but in my specific case, OCD worked as such. I knew I had something bad happen to me. However, I didn't have a way to get a direct answer as a child. I just knew my reality was filled with a lot of questions and no real way to kind of answer said questions. This is where my brain started to fill in the blanks, as I guess you could say. It started setting me up with situations where I did have control over my surroundings. This could include an intrusive thought regarding, oh, if you don't write a sentence 15 times correctly, your parents will leave you. And if I ignored such an intrusive thought, it didn't go away. It persisted over and over, causing me extreme stress until I did the action, therefore validating it and giving me an answer somehow in my head. It's very confusing, but it's just how it works. Eventually, it got to a point where I could barely function throughout throughout my childhood. I feared death from a very early age. I feared that my loved ones would get harmed, that people would hate me, and that I secretly wanted to harm someone and I didn't know it. During an already hard time in my early teens where my parents were getting divorced, I went on to take something known as fluoxetine. You might also know this as Prozac. It's a very popular antidepressant. For years between each household, I would have either one parent encourage me to take my meds, or I'd have another parent encourage me not to do so. I remember just how irritable and awful I felt on said medicine, but I also was going through a very hard and confusing time in my life as a teenager in a new city who was also going through a divorce. Like, needless to say, it was excuse my French here, a storm of mental whatever you want to call it. So when I was 16, I decided to quit cold turkey, which is a massive no-no. It was hell at first, and it was not fun by any means. But after a few years, I really started to notice my symptoms had become manageable. This isn't to say you should stop taking your meds by any means. I just couldn't afford my meds, and my father at the time didn't think they were in my best interest, so I just personally would try to combat most of these things myself. I really hate bringing this up, but it feels like a cop-out on my part, but it's the turn of events that ended up taking place as to why this ties in to where we are at. About halfway through the pandemic, I was working from home. It was during this time that Sad Milk fell apart, and I hopped onto the bandwagon of witch hunting my former colleagues and friends. Something I am ashamed I ever even took place in to begin with. Oz and Blair lived together for many months, so they both had each other during this time. Particularly post-December, it would just be me by myself in a room alone. I saw my roommate, who again I mentioned is one of my closest friends, but at the time he had a job as well, and it just was more or less short conversation of, hey, how's your day going? And that really was my social interaction for weeks at a time. Aside from that, I would just be in my room constantly editing. It was here in this environment that my OCD started creeping in slowly until it grew into a full-on sprint. At this time, Blair had already offered me the job, but I was still debating if I wanted to go to Colorado. So I sat on it and I thought really hard. Thought about my dog and how I'd always wanted to provide a home for him. Thought about the pain of leaving my loved ones and my friends of almost 10 years. But I also thought about my future for the first time in a very long time. Thought about how I could afford therapy, something I hadn't been able to do for a very long time. How I could really maybe make a name for myself on the platform, and how I could maybe just for once have full control over my life and save myself from the constant cycle I had been stuck in since I was a child. And so I agreed. This is a part where it's gonna really suck if you get uncomfortable really easily. I took the job. I went back on my meds. I said goodbye to my friends. I shared tears with people who had been family to me. I'm just gonna blur this out, man. I said goodbye to my dearest friends who I did everything with. I said goodbye to my home. I knew I was doing the right thing, and everyone with either open words of encouragement or painful goodbyes in private. So fucking hard to read, man. They all held the same sentiment to me. They were proud of me. For the first time in my life, I felt I knew my purpose. I felt I was more than a burden. I felt like I was someone who mattered. I felt more than my trauma or my past or my OCD. I felt like I was just me. Then upon moving, if you've watched the video up to this point, you already know everything that's taken place. So when Blair took the car, I knew I had nothing left but a few clothes on my back, and everyone would soon find out that the person they were so proud of just 2 months prior was back at home and broke. And for me, I couldn't really handle that. I had tried so hard to show every effort that I cared, that I wanted to do a good job, that I wanted to succeed, and it ended up with me having nothing. I truly was a failure now, and nobody could say anything else because I couldn't speak publicly or I'd be threatened with legal action. By this point, my mental health was in a full collapse. Everything was dark, and I felt I had nowhere to go, and that every exit just led to more pain. So while my dad was away, I sat at his kitchen counter, thinking, reviewing my options, whatever that even means, and I chose that I wanted to. So as Blair showed, I started to look for a key to a. Now, I'm not religious by any means. I don't have anything against anyone who is, but sometimes things just work in really weird ways. I got a call from my therapist as I was in the closet looking for a key. I had entirely forgotten that we had scheduled an appointment that day. It wasn't really on my mind. Nothing was really on my mind. I just wanted to stop hurting. I answered and she asked me how my day was going, and I told her, oh, not much, I just want to end my life. And again, I don't mean to laugh, but she said, well, how about we just don't do that and talk? Which was just like, it was so crazy. It's just like, I can't even imagine. I mean, like, I guess they're a therapist, they deal with that, but I can't imagine what it's like. How's your Tuesday afternoon going? Oh, you know. But I listened and we did talk. I walked out into my dad's bedroom and I just cried on the phone for about an hour. And throughout it, I'll never forget what she told me. She said, you feared for the worst. You fought your whole life trying to avoid the worst possible outcome. And now the worst possible outcome has happened. And you're alive. You know, I'm still standing here, man. I personally had never thought of it like that. I truly didn't. So after our calls, I was still in a living hell, but the idea had more or less left my mind. And so yeah, I did send Blair that heated message because I was at the end of my rope. So when Blair claimed she sent authorities to my house for a wellness check, she didn't care about me. She put in her own Google Drive that I brought the mention of guns to the table and she was locking the cars away and was scared, leaving out that the weapon in reference was aimed towards me. I know I'm supposed to be professional here, but I believe that that text alone only showed she cared about her narrative of herself being a victim. And by showing text with her therapist, she's trying to claim the Good Samaritan card, which is very contradictory given the tones of the perceived messages that I saw. Also, something I'd like to note is that I wasn't there when Blair called 911 to send authorities to my home, but depending on her wording, it could have gone very wrong. To tell authorities there is a mentally unwell man with a weapon, that can go so very bad, so very fast. So yeah, after this long, very drawn out explanation of my mental health, yes, I did send Blair that heated message because I was indeed heated. It wasn't a bluff. I had nothing to gain from this. I was at the end of what I could handle as a person. So to share this sensitive moment with the world, I don't understand what the end goal is with it. Now we're on to a bit of a lighter topic because anytime I think of my dog, it brings a massive smile to my face. I love this dog with all of my heart. As we start to near the end of this video, I believe we have only 2 subjects after this. I wanted to touch on the claims made about my dog James and how I cared for this handsome individual. I love this guy, look at him. Blair for some reason brings up an entirely unrelated matter involving my dog James and I. She paints me to be a dismissive, uncaring father to a starving, aggressive, abused dog. This dog right here. This dog who's scared of fucking leaves. So allow me to shed some light. I adopted James back in 2019 from a small shelter in Central Texas. I remember seeing his cage and the information on it said class clown. So naturally, I had to say hello to this guy. Within the first 10 minutes of meeting James, I immediately knew that this guy was gonna be my best friend. He was sweet, he was gentle, he was social, but he's very shy. Another fact about James was he was the dog that the staff would use at the shelter to introduce other dogs to see if they were friendly or not due to James' naturally calm nature. When I moved to Colorado, I did bring dog food. It was just about half a bag though. James's brand of dog food is also specific to a store in Texas known as HEB. So I had to find him a new specific kind of dog food as he had a sensitive stomach and switching his dog food would result in messes. But upon arriving to Colorado, Oz and Blair wanted to see if James wanted to try Casper's brand, so we just switched over to that. He loved it, and Casper has been known in the past for making severe messes everywhere due to his very irritable stomach as he is a special needs dog. As for his collar, James did have a collar, but it was old and starting to wear. I went to PetSmart on my second day in Colorado and bought him a brand new dog tag alongside a red plaid collar, a collar which he still wears to this day. I also did not lock Casper in the room to keep James roaming the home. I would put Casper in a separate room sometimes so James could pee, as Casper would bark constantly at the bedroom door which James and I stayed in. Whenever James was out, Casper would gnaw on his ears, which is something Blair did not mention. James did bite Casper. He made Casper bleed. But what Blair left out is that since Casper was a puppy, he has had a bad habit of gnawing on other dogs' ears. This is due to him being around another dog named Percy who exhibits this kind of behavior. And you can see this dog exists on Casper's own YouTube channel. So one day Casper kept chewing and dragging on James, so naturally he snapped back. James only did this because Casper wouldn't stop attacking him. It wasn't the other way around. As for James getting out and pooping downstairs and me not helping clean it up, there's a lot of reasons for this and a lot of context left out. The night James got out and got lost, I made a mistake and forgot he was out there in the backyard. I was in between helping Oz with something downstairs and going back and forth, but James needed to pee, so I tried the multitask. After like 10 minutes, Oz suggested we go grab dinner real quick, and we left for like 2 hours. I personally messed up, and I take full accountability for it happening. I left James out in the backyard. But what pet owner hasn't made a mistake like this once or twice in their life? Sometimes someone forgets to close the door or the gate or whatever, and it happens. It's a story as old as time. It doesn't mean you don't care about the dog, it just means an accident happened. What Blair again also doesn't mention is that the backyard had a large patio area that Casper would take naps in, and sometimes James when they all chilled out together. The backyard was also fenced in. Blair leaves out that the way James got out was because a fence wire broke loose, undoing some of the fencing along a post, allowing a small entryway into the neighborhood. Had this not come undone, James would be sitting on the dog beds waiting, which again, James being outside is my fault, but the fence failing is just human error. Blair talks about putting James on the Nextdoor app, which despite my reservations against Blair, this was a good act. But again, what she leaves out is she didn't get a call about James. I did. After James had run away, I searched for hours, well into the early morning hours looking for him. And when I couldn't find him, Oz gave me a sleeping bag. The very same sleeping bag you can see in this photo in the BMW. I slept outside in 40-degree weather just for the smallest chance that he would catch my scent. Like, I was grasping at straws here, hoping that I could just find my dog on top of everything else happening. And I believe somewhere between 7 to 9 a.m., somewhere in that time frame, I got a call on my phone that James had been found not far from the house. I immediately got up, exhausted as hell, and I went and I picked him up. If Blair got a message on the Nextdoor app, I don't know how when I was the one who went and picked him up. So after bringing him back to the house, I brought him to my bedroom where I passed out. However, to my discovery, James had eaten something as dogs do when they get out, and he was shitting everywhere in my room. So I got up and I started cleaning. I put James outside the room while I cleaned it, and after I did, I brought him back in, and yet again, I fell asleep. I was beyond exhausted at this point. What I didn't know was that James had run downstairs when I put him out, and he everywhere downstairs as well. So when Blair claims I just let my dog use the restroom and did nothing to clean it up, I just didn't know he had used the bathroom downstairs. And at this point, I was already dead asleep. No, this wasn't malicious, and it was just a sincere accident, which seems hypocritical of Blair, who owns a special needs dog who suffered worse for way longer. Blair claims that I did not assist with a mess located in the lower level of your home, as well as a staircase leading to said lower level of the home. What was your experience with situation as the owner of this home?
Like, no shade to you, and like, you know, of course, but like no one like recounts the situation properly, because you weren't sleeping. I'm surprised that you even made that mention. You were actually like very well awake and already cleaning the mess up when we had actually got upstairs. What had happened was, woke up that morning, came out from the basement, and there was like, you know, a trail of dog mess is the best way to put it, kind of like just leading all over the downstairs. It went up and down the stairs, and you know, Blair and I, of course, we weren't happy to see that initially, but when we had gone upstairs, you were already cleaning up the mess. Blair had to leave the house, and that left you and I with cleaning it, because you and I, we were actively cleaning it up. We were both taking turns using the pet vacuum. I was covering the downstairs and you were covering the upstairs. It's not like you just slept through it either. You were actively cleaning.
I'd also like to add that I did mediate between Casper and James a lot of time. When Casper and James would constantly be going at each other, usually not aggressively, they're just being dogs, I would calm them down using dog CBD oil. Yeah, you know, they were having a great time with that. So anytime they were getting rowdy, I'd bring them into my bedroom, give them dog CBD, and we would watch videos of this guy who raises hawks until they fell asleep. I would have James on one side, and I would have Casper on the other, and they would just be cozy, relaxing, so they could be introduced to one another. We took numerous naps together. We hung out all the time. There are so many times I mediated between this dog, so to say I tried to do nothing, it's just not true. As for saying James had no toys, James did have toys. It's just when he'd play with them, he'd annihilate them within an hour. And he still has toys to this day. My boyfriend and I just got him a snuffle mat last week. And while yes, this is extremely biased for me to bring up, because yes, this is my boyfriend, you can find a Twitter thread listed down below of their experience with James and I after living with me for 6 months. I'd like to add, I did not ask them to write this, as honestly, that'd be pretty messed up, especially given the circumstances. They took to Twitter via my phone after I went offline. But aside from that, here are some images of me and the big guy. Yep, he looks absolutely miserable, doesn't he? Alright, at last we have reached the last discussion of this video, and this is probably just gonna go by rather quickly. When I took to Twitter in my initial thread, I posted a photo that shows the disaster of a room. When Blair saw this, she had a pretty convincing switch around for this image. She claimed I went into a room that was being used for storage after they moved into their home, and that I was told to not go into this room ever, yet here I was clear as day posting a photo to Twitter of a clearly off-limits room that I used to embarrass Oz and Blair, and that shows my clear lack of respect towards others and their privacy.
This was a room that we told you we were using to move, and we let you know it was off limits to you. That photo alone shows your consistent lack of respect for Oz's and my boundaries.
She goes as far to even do an image breakdown analysis of the room itself to prove this image, which I found peculiar watching this for the first time, because if she took this much effort to analyze the image, I don't understand how she didn't notice that the bed on the bottom left was not purchased until 2022, a year after I left Colorado. How do I know this? Because I didn't take these photos. Oz did, and I held back out of respect for my friend. If you look here, you will see that I actually never set foot in that room. These are the living conditions of Oz Media's home after Blair moved back in. Conditions he was embarrassed by. Boxes, trash, cups of mold, all sent to me again 2 years after I left Colorado. And this is my proof that once more, I never set foot in that room, nor did I have malicious intent when I lived there. Blair embarrassed Oz, not me. In the video, I touch on an image I shared to Twitter involving the living conditions of your home while Blair was an active tenant. She claims these conditions were due to her being in the process of a move, and that I took these images with intent to embarrass the both of you. Would you be, in your own words, willing to shed light on these claims?
This is tricky to talk about just because like that was like the condition of living with Blair. Like that's always how it has been. No matter how many times cleaning was attempted, it always ended up becoming that level of mess. There was no cleaning in that house. It was always a disaster. No matter how many times attempts were made, it would take less than a week or two for things to re-messify. I even remember on my 22nd birthday, I had asked like, hey, can we please get like the kitchen and living room cleaned up so we actually have like a space to exist? And that was like my birthday present for that year, was cleaning the kitchen and the living room. Just because the house was always a mess. Yeah, some of it was mine as well, but the thing was there was never a home for, like, right now the house is actually, house is pretty clean right now. I can show pictures of that, but there was no clean. It was always like that. It wasn't just one room, it was every room. And I remember when I was messaging you, there was just a level of frustration because it felt like no matter how often I would actually clean and do stuff, it just always like remessified. There was no cleaning. It just felt useless, and she would never help with cleaning. It was always me. I was always the one breaking down all 800 of her Amazon boxes. I was always the one doing anything cleaning wise. It just felt like I was there to clean up her mess.
I'd also like to note that you didn't ask me to post those photos, and I on my own accord took to Twitter, so you can confirm that I never once was in there or took that photo. Well, I guess you can't confirm that I wasn't in that room, but can you confirm that I was not the person who took this photo?
For starters, the mess that I took the photo of wasn't even the same mess that existed in that room when you lived there. It was a very different mess. Just with everything that happened, the mess, it did get cleaned up, then it remessified. So like that wasn't even the same mess. It was me who took that photo because I was trying to both, for my sanity, catalog what the house looked like before I started cleaning, as well as just for my sake, just like have proof that this was the case.
Which leads me to my final discussion. Oz and I used to be fairly close before Colorado. After the events that took place, we had officially turned against each other, and I didn't understand why he and Blair did what they did, because for 2 years I believed it was both of their doing as to why I went through what I did. I never thought I would hear about Colorado and that what happened would ever be rectified. However, one morning as I was getting ready for work, I received this message from Oz Media in the early hours of 2:35 a.m. January 6, 2023. I was highly skeptical, which I made note of, but I listened, and as we began to talk once again, we started to connect the dots and find so much context that had been left out between us. I was still very much on edge with my trust, but over the last few months, Oz has made countless efforts to prove not only to me, but to every other former Sad Milk member that he truly was sorry for the role he played in anything that took place. It shows a tremendous amount of strength, and Oz will always have my respect as a person for what he has done. I don't blame him for his role. He was in an abusive situation and had every reason to fear Blair. I feared her too for a very long time. For over a year, I watched one of my best friends slowly wither and question everything in his his work ethic for his beloved channel fade away. After everything came out, I now understand why this was the case. So to watch tears flow from Blair for 3 minutes after knowing what will always remain behind closed doors between those two, it personally sickens me. At the end of Blair's video, she has what appears to be a heartfelt cry regarding your friendship. This section is roughly 3 minutes. She goes into detail about you, Casper, better times, and involves hobbies, etc. Would you like to share your thoughts on what you felt or thought when you first saw this?
There's not really a nice way that I can actually say this. I've watched her build those tears up on multiple occasions, whether it's she forgot she had a prior engagement, so she built up tears and said, I have to take Casper to the vet and I'm very scared, so I won't be able to make it, or for talking to other content creators that she's had issues with of welling up those tears for apologies, for talking with employees, for talking with me or her roommates. It's something that I have watched her do on numerous occasions. If they were genuine, I mean, there's that, but I have a really hard time believing it with how many times I've actually seen her build those tears up. And considering when I did post my thread on Twitter and I did make the comments that I made, the tone that she had in messages was night and day. What I'm trying to say is that the tone that she had in the end of her video was not the tone that she had with me behind the scenes. The tone that she had with me behind the scenes was very much accusing. A few vague threats were thrown in there, which I don't want to go into details on because I just, for me personally, with how I see all of this, I don't want to make a response video. This might hopefully be where my response is within the confines of your response, just because I would like to keep this. I don't want to drag out Blair and I's personal life is the best way of putting it. I would rather try to keep that as private as I possibly can, because there's a lot of things I don't think is necessary to talk about.
I've seen and heard what this individual has put this man through, and it is simply unfair to have included this section in the video. I can only hope that from here on out, Oz can find the peace and passion for not only his work, but the life he so rightfully deserves. I'd like to say one more time, thank you for everything you made right, Oz. You are generally a really good guy. So, we've reached the end of this video, and if you made it through to the end, I appreciate your patience, as I'm aware this was probably very lengthy. I hope that what I was able to provide today brought some context and clarity for anyone who wanted to know the full scope and both sides of the story that was presented online over the last few weeks. I'm not going to tell you how to view what I've said here. I'm not going to tell you how to view me. I'm not going to tell you how to view any of this story. That is not my place. That is entirely up to you to decide how you feel. Before I leave, I just want to say thank you to every single person who has been supportive and reached out to me with kind words and support over the last week. I'd like to personally thank my boyfriend who has helped me keep my head on straight for this entire ordeal, as I know this has also been extremely hard on them to deal with as well. So if you already can't tell, I'm exhausted. It's 5:41 in the morning. I haven't been able to sleep in roughly a week. I just want to take some time to relax, take just a little bit of a break from content, and just spend time, I don't know, just doing any semblance of life. I want to spend time with my boyfriend, or go outside, or just anything that isn't this. I just want peace and to enjoy my life. So now I'm gonna go take a hot bath and pass the out, probably get some good sleep for the first time in a week.